Andrea, how are you?
Should I say I'm fine and then you'll say you're fine and then we'll pretend like we're both fine?
So actually, you and I have known each other a bunch of years, and you have been a confidant and a coach to me for a while. And I wanted to share some of the way you view the world with other people. And instead of like interviewing you, because I find that sort of rather distant, I thought I'd actually just ask you some real questions, and sort of take the risk to let people hear it all. Um, so here's what I'm dealing with. So at the beginning of COVID, I called a friend of mine in the military and I asked him, how do you compartmentalize your emotions? Because I knew that we were dealing with trauma and I wanted to be mission focused and pivot my business. But at the same time, there was this trauma of COVID. And I know that in combat, they're able to compartmentalize their emotions so they can stay focused at the mission at hand. And he gave me a very stern warning. He basically said, you can't compartmentalize your emotions, not for any length of time. He says, we can do it for a short period of time in battle. He says, but you're going to deal with it at some point. You're dealing with trauma. There's no avoiding trauma. And he says, sometimes, we often deal with it months after we get home. So I took that warning to heart and I called all of my A-type personality friends and gave them the warning that we're not avoiding this, we're delaying this. And it's been we're now 4 or 5 months in, something like that. And I know that he sometimes starts to feel the effects about 4 or 5 months after. And I'm actually right on schedule, weirdly. I'm starting to feel it now. Yeah. And so I called him the other day and there's no leading the witness. I didn't say what I was going through. I didn't say what I was experiencing. I started with a very open-ended question. I asked, what are your symptoms when you come back from combat? And he said one of his symptoms is that his sleep schedule gets disrupted. So he starts going to bed really late for no reason. And then in the morning, doesn't want to get out of bed. And I'm like, check. And then he says he has one day where he's totally unproductive and unmotivated. And he says to himself, well, that's okay. I needed a break anyway. I needed to relax. But then he has another and another and another. And I'm like, check. And then he said, and he doesn't want to spend time talking to people, with people. And I was like, check. And I'm coming to terms with the fact that, 4 months in, I'm now starting to deal with it and I am not myself. And when other people ask me for advice, how to deal with this, I'm good at dispensing the advice. I'm not necessarily try to follow it. I am calling people, like you and I are having this conversation now, but I'm very curious, do I just have to sit in this? Can I expedite it? How do I manage it? Like, what is this and how do I get through it? Somebody asked me, are you depressed? And I don't know how to answer that question. Is that a clinical diagnosis? I'm off my game. So help me make sense of this.
Sure. So let's start with, how are you? Like, how are you feeling? What are you feeling?
Like I said, I know I'm not myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, motivation comes and goes, sometimes in a day, feeling alone but not lonely.
What's the difference for you?
So the difference for me is like, I thank goodness I have my family. That has absolutely helped keep me sane. But I definitely notice the effects of being single. Like, and I've gone long periods being single before and it's just like, whatever, but now it's like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Right. Right.
I don't know even how to, and I'm not that motivated to go meet somebody either.
Yeah. And it's really hard, complicated right now.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed about how you just explained how you were feeling is you actually didn't tell me any feelings. You told me your behaviors. You did say one thing, that you weren't lonely. You were not one emotion. You weren't feeling that. And so, I think one of the first steps to understanding how we work with these things is to first be able to name it. So we have these like handy little sheets, because you're essentially learning a new language. Most of us as kids, like, we never really learned how to name our emotions or work with them or anything. Kids today are starting to learn that more as a part of, just sort of coming up in school and that sort of thing, but we didn't. So the first step is to say, how am I actually feeling, and to be able to put a name on it. It takes practice. It doesn't happen right away really easily, but over time, if you keep doing the practice, you'll be able to say, how am I feeling? Well, I'm feeling sad, and I'm feeling scared, and I'm feeling lonely, and I'm feeling hopeful, and I'm feeling excited. And you can feel all of these things together. But the first step is to really know what it is. So you want to try again and see if we can and find a feeling. You might need to wait a minute. You might need to close your eyes. You might need to put your hand on your chest. That's like a nervous system thing that we sometimes do, and it can help us slow things down a little bit.
Is malaise a feeling? I feel it's hard to explain. I guess that's the whole point of feelings, right? I know that it's funny. I know the biology. I know that feelings are hard to put into words because they're in our limbic brain, which doesn't control language. So I understand the biology of why I struggle to put things into words. That's not helpful, is it? How am I feeling? I mean, the way I've been describing it is off my game, not myself. I mean, these are not affirmative feelings. These are, I'm telling you what I'm not.
Yeah. So sometimes we see this when we actually either don't know what we're feeling or we can't stick with it. We get these, like what I call moving away experiences. So because it feels awful to sit in sadness or fear or anger or whatever, sometimes we're like, I'm just gonna like go over here. I'm gonna push that there. And so that's when we feel malaise. That's when we feel off our game. That's when we feel sluggish. We don't want to get out of bed. It's different for everyone. Some people are exploding at people. Some people are just sort of like quietly disappearing. There's a lot of different ways this can show up, but that's usually because we're not like able to sit with that feeling for whatever reason. And for a lot of us, most of us, we haven't had this many challenging feelings all at once. And that's what's so interesting about this time. I mean, it's hard for everyone, but it's kind of equalizing, right? Single people are having a hard time. Parents are having a hard time. Like everybody's having their own version of a hard time, but like all at once.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think I'm as you're talking, I'm going through all the things in my head, and they're all unwords, like unmotivated or frustrated, or out of control. They're all, there's also an element of guilt, I think, because I know that there are people dealing with way more than I'm dealing with. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of guilt, like that I even feel bad at all,
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And because the biology, that your body doesn't compare how you're feeling to other people and then say, oh, okay, now I can feel upset. Now I can let it affect me. It's like everybody's experience is their own experience, whether it's technically super terrible or technically okay, right? A lot of us are technically okay. Like we're not living on the street. We have food to eat. Like we're going to be okay. But our emotions are run off of like a very ancient system in us, right? So like belonging is a big one. Loneliness is a big one. Like if you get cast out of the tribe and a lion's going to eat you, that's a problem. So we're wired to be really upset about this. I hear a lot of people saying like, I'm okay. Like I see a couple people, like I shouldn't be this upset by this, but we're supposed to be like this. It's how we stay alive. It's how we've stayed alive for a long time.
So how do I find myself again? Like, I don't need to be like rah, rah, rah every day. I get that. Like, that's fine. Like there's the usual machinations of, but how do I get through this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really about starting to access those feelings a little bit at a time, getting used to it, saying, I can handle it. This isn't really that bad. And getting to the point where we can tolerate more of these uncomfortable feelings. And then we don't have to do this dodging thing. Like
you're saying I have to find words I have to find those words, even if they're very uncomfortable to admit.
Yes. First you find the words. The next step you do is you actually learn how to sit with those feelings a little bit.
Alone?
Alone or with a coach or with a therapist or with a friend or whatever. It doesn't really matter. As long as you feel safe and you can handle it. and most people think like, okay, if I'm going to get into sad, I'm going to open this Pandora's box of sadness and I'm going to fall into the abyss and that'll be the end of it, right? I was just going to die alone sad. But really what happens is if we go through a process, we can say, okay, I feel sad. I don't like to feel sad, whatever, but I feel it, and I'm going to feel it for a couple of minutes. And you can actually like decide to feel sad for a minute. You can set a timer. You can practice feeling sad. Then you can feel sad for a little longer and a little longer until maybe it only takes a couple of minutes of feeling sad for it to pass through you. Maybe you'll feel sad again tomorrow. Maybe you won't.
I really like this. I like this idea of giving yourself permission to feel, because I think so many times, I'll speak for myself, if I have feelings that I would consider negative or things that pull me back or hold me down or whatever words you want to use, there's the suppression, like I cannot feel this way, or I have to get over this, and what I'm denying myself is the permission to just accept the feelings and feel them. And so what I appreciate is to give that feeling a name. Even if I want to call it depression, it doesn't have to be a clinical diagnosis. I think a lot of people are afraid of those words that veer into sort of diagnoses, myself included. And give it whatever it's called and say, okay, today I'm going to feel depressed for 20 minutes, and set a timer. And whatever depression means, I can pull out the ice cream or watch TV, sit in bed. I'm allowed to be depressed for 20 minutes today.
Yeah. And we start with like 2 minutes.
2 minutes even.
Like you can just like dip your toe in. This doesn't have to be a whole big thing. You can just dip your toe in. What does it feel like to feel sad? What does it feel like to feel scared? You can do a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there.
Yeah.
And rather compartmentalize, like you may have to do in the military. You're able to say, hey, like a thing happened today and I felt terrible. Okay, that's sad. I'm going to spend a couple minutes on it. Oh, and I felt frustrated, because you can feel a lot of things at once, right? And so one thing that really occurs to me is like, you're the optimist guy. You're supposed to be positive. You're supposed to be hopeful. You're supposed to be all the positive emotions. So what happens when the optimist guy has challenging feelings and maybe isn't feeling super positive all the time? Like I would imagine you have a lot, maybe even more pressure than the average person to not show that you're feeling these things.
Yes and no. I mean, optimism is a bias for me. It's a natural disposition, and so I am finding that when my friends are calling me and saying, like a friend called me the other day and said, she's struggling. I was my old self again. Like, to be in service to me is the thing that I need the most. And I think one of the things that I'm struggling with is I have fewer opportunities to really be in service. And posting things on social media is not service, but to actually be there with people, for people. Even if it's something as silly as just answering questions, when I do book club every week, I just answer people's questions. I'm so happy to be. Service. And I think part of what is creating my feeling is I'm disconnected from the thing that brings me joy, which is service. And finding new ways to serve at a distance. And by the way, when I say at a distance, phone is fine.
Right.
But Yeah. So I don't feel the pressure that I have to be optimistic all the time because I've got something to prove and it's my brand, because I don't want to fake it. I also pride myself on the fact that, there's an authenticity to all of it, that I am who I am,
Right.
warts and all.
Right.
And if I'm always optimistic, that means it's an unrealistic thing for others to aim for. Which is, no one's that way all the time.
Right.
Um,
Well, what I found with I tend towards optimism too, and a lot of my clients do, what I found is that means we have less practice with those difficult emotions. So sometimes it's like, it's not that it's pressure, but like, that's just the way that we are. So then when we have this experience of being in a lot of difficult emotions, we're like, this isn't really like our realm. I don't really do sad. Like I'm just going to silver lining everything, which is fine sometimes, but like, I mean, you're good at being in service and being with people and how they're feeling. Like you clearly have a lot of practice at that, but I wonder how much practice you have for yourself in being with those things.
The thing that I really appreciate about this is this idea of practicing emotions, which is, and it's not just the bad ones, but the good ones. Like for people who are in a bad place or who struggle with things like optimism, to practice happy. Today, I'm going to be happy for 2 minutes. Something good happened. I'm going to do happy for 2 minutes, or proud of something I completed. And I think that's really fantastic. I think that's such great advice, especially for people who, there's loss of income, there's jobs, all of these things that are happening to people, to practice good as well. For me to be okay with, unfamiliar emotions, I think it can be across the board. I just love this idea of practicing emotions, no matter what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a client right now who's been working on joy because he's really good at finding the problems, and he's built this incredible company because he can find all the problems and patch them up. And then now that we're saying, well, what's good and what's wonderful? And he's like, I don't know. And now that he's been searching for joy and practicing feeling joy, like he's finding it everywhere. So you're totally right. It's like a lot of people come and they say, I don't do emotions. I'm not really good at them. Or I'm like, I feel comfortable in this zone. And it just means they haven't practiced. Some people get practice as kids from their parents. Some people get practice in school. Some of us never learned it. So we just have to learn it now. And it's not this mysterious thing. It's another skill that we practice, and it makes us great leaders, and it makes us great friends and partners and all the things.
This is so good. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You're so good. I appreciate it. I'm going to call you afterwards and try and tell you some of these emotions.
Yeah, I love that.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye.